Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have a wonderful crowd this evening, and we are delighted that you are all here. By the way, there is an even larger crowd because we are live streaming tonight's address by Governor Jindal. So in the question and answer period that will follow his remarks, if you wish to ask a question, remember you have to go to the microphone because otherwise the audience at home won't hear you, and I won't recognize you. We are delighted, and we bring warm greetings from Mrs. Reagan, Governor, and Mrs. Jindal. She is so delighted that you're here, and we thank you for coming to the Reagan Library. We're very proud of the library. We have good friends. Tonight, one of our favorite trustees is with us. I'm going to ask him to stand and that you acknowledge his presence warmly. Lod Cook. And we are particularly delighted that accompanying Governor Jindal this evening is his lovely wife, Supriya. And of course, an old and good friend of this library, former Congressman Elton Gallickley. And his lovely wife, Janice. We will begin, as we do customarily, with the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. I have a very pleasant duty this evening. As some of you know, I have some partiality to governors, especially brilliant young Republican governors. And I must say that our guest this evening not just fits that category, but he really almost defines it. I just wear these for effect. The effect is I can see. Governor Bobby Jindal is truly extraordinary, and I am capsuling his resume. It's extraordinary that he could have achieved all that he has in the brief time that he has been on this earth. He was born in 1971. You do the math. And he has been recognized by his peers in virtually every capacity in which he has performed as a leader. And they have chosen him to be their leader time and again, whether it was as the president of the freshman class when he went to Congress, and recently, as I think many of you know, and this is an audience of, I won't say political junkies, but good citizens, interested citizens, so you doubtless know that he is an immediate past president of the Republican Governors Association. Why all of this for someone so young? Well, to begin with, it's been clearly, we've had fair warning, I'll put it that way. He began with an extraordinary scholastic record, a record of really remarkable accomplishment, collecting the highest academic honors at Brown University, and then, although offered admission to both the medical and the law schools at both Harvard and Yale, he chose instead to exercise a little travel lust and went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. When he returned, having demonstrated in 2 different continents his expertise in healthcare policy, it was not surprising that the private sector decided that they could use his talents as well. So for a time, he joined McKinsey & Company, extraordinarily well-known, deservedly well-known private sector consultants. But because of the fact that his fame was spreading, they didn't allow him to stay very long. He didn't get to make much money because very soon he was called into government service by the state of Louisiana, and specifically was appointed to serve as the Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals chief secretary of that organization at a really pivotal time in the 1990s, improving services dramatically for the disabled and the elderly, and, just by the way, giving a hint of future performance just in time to rescue the Louisiana state Medicaid system from bankruptcy. Well, not too long thereafter, recognizing his talents and his deep interest in education, he was made the president of the state university system, the University of Louisiana system, something that Lod Cook knows about since he's given most of it. And very shortly thereafter, he was inducted, I will say he was welcomed, into the administration of President George W. Bush. But that was only the beginning. He had demonstrated enormous determination to assist in the reforms that the Bush administration undertook. And then the next thing is he went to Congress. And I know that Elton was pleased to spend time with him there. The interesting thing is that not only was he elected the president of the freshman class, but very quickly he demonstrated great wisdom, and let's just, to shortcut it, say it was the bottom of Obama, or the opposite of Obamacare. I don't think I need explain that. Anyway, shortly thereafter, having spent a little time in the Congress, having been reelected by an overwhelming margin, he decided that he wanted to come home and run for governor. A very good idea. One that I shared, but it took me a little longer to figure it out. Anyway, he was elected and then reelected in a landslide. His campaign was marked by an insistence upon a new transparency and high ethics. Let me tell you, he made good on that pledge and with great determination made changes in the law. The result was that the National Center for Public Integrity rated the laws that he had brought to the books in Louisiana as imposing some of the highest ethical standards in the country. And he has been an absolute zealot in terms of reforming education. Louisiana at one point did not have high standards. They do now. The city of New Orleans, as a result of Katrina, they say an ill wind that blows no one good. That was an ill wind, but it drew the kind of people into charter schools. Now, he tells me 90% of the New Orleans public schools are charter schools. The performance by students has doubled. And he has, by virtue of the articulate leadership that he has given to organizations, Like the Republican Governors Association, he is recognized by his colleagues, by his peers, as not just articulate, but as really one of the most impressive conservative thinkers of our time. So you should feel quite at home in these halls. I will simply say that we could go on, but I know that you want to hear him, so I will simply conclude with an observation. Two observations. He has been an enormously good friend of the other institution that is my favorite activity, along with the Reagan Presidential Foundation, and that is the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. It's New Orleans. It is New Orleans' gift to America. After more than half a century had gone by without our acknowledging the debt that we owed to the young Americans who fought and won that war, New Orleans finally said, "To hell with the Congress." A widespread feeling then and now. We will do it here in New Orleans. And so they did. The same people who had won, whose confidence he had won with his policies of getting rid of burdensome taxes, regulatory excess, said we should apply the same policies to building a museum, not simply a memorial. The result is that the World War II Museum, with considerable support from our friend the governor, even though it is primarily privately subscribed, has been able to build out a master plan that calls for 7 pavilions. We have just completed the construction of the 6th. There's one to go, fittingly named the Liberation Pavilion. And we are grateful for the tremendous interest that he has shown, the leadership that he has shown. The leadership he has shown in Louisiana is spreading beyond its boundaries. So I will simply say this. There is some peril in being so extraordinarily talented and having achieved such a remarkable record of accomplishment so young. And I think it probably has occurred to you that it may raise expectations that are somewhat irrational, even in the case of someone as talented, as determined, and as successful as Bobby Jindal. But, you know, I can think of only one instance in which that kind of challenge was put to him that he couldn't quite meet it. It had to do with the ceremony that attended his inaugural and his first election as governor. It was a dramatic time. He gave a stirring, moving address, and then to cap it at the end, there was a military flyover of Navy jet fighters, the sound of freedom. You've all heard it, and it's extraordinary. But with him watching it was his then 3-year-old son, Sean. And Sean put a question to him that he really couldn't handle. Sean liked it so much, he turned to his father and he said, "Daddy, make him do it again." Well, maybe that was too much, but I think that those of us who have had the pleasure of working with him and of listening to him have been inspired by the kind of talent, the kind of determination, the patriotism of this young man. And I think he is young. We have not heard the last. Shouldn't have heard that at all. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Reagan Library welcome to Governor Bobby Jindal.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you for that very warm reception. Pete, thank you for that very generous introduction. Congressman, great privilege to see you again. Lod, always a pleasure to see my friend from back home in Louisiana. I will finish the story that Pete told you, and I want to thank him for his commitment, his dedication, not only to the state of California, but our country. I want to invite all of you to come visit the World War II Museum. It is important to remember the greatest generation, but it is also important to show our children the price they paid for our freedom. It is an amazing, amazing exhibit. And I want to thank the governor for his dedication, his tireless service. Let's give your governor a great round of applause for what he does for us. Now, I will make a confession. It is true, my 3-year-old son turned to me as those planes flew over and said exactly what the governor said, what Pete said, "Daddy, make them do it again." And being a father as well as a governor, I said, "Son, if you behave for 4 years, we'll make them come back." And the good news is they did. Thank you so much for the privilege of being here today. Look, it is an honor to be here, and I've been looking forward to this night for a very long time. The reality is I have spoken aggressively in these past months about the awful effects of Obamacare, about our need to reform the American education system and the urgency for our country to re-endorse the concept of growing our economy that President Reagan so uniquely championed. These are issues of great importance, essential for the future of America. But tonight I want to talk to you about something different. I want to talk to you about an entirely different topic, and a topic that may surprise you. Tonight I want to give you a speech that I've never given before about an issue that is lurking just beneath the surface. And that issue is this: the silent war on religious liberty taking place right now in the United States of America. And honestly, I can think of no better place to give this speech than the Ronald Reagan Foundation and Library. And I'm so honored to be here. President Reagan himself said that freedom is not the sole prerogative of a chosen few, but it is the universal right of all of God's children. Now, when he said this, he wasn't just expressing a strictly personal belief in the nature of man as a created being, as a child of God. He was reaffirming the most basic contention of the American founding, set forth in the Declaration of Independence, that we are a nation constituted in accordance with the laws of nature and of nature's God, and that we are a people endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, let me make this explicit. The source and justification for the very existence of the United States of America is and always has been contingent upon the understanding of man as a created being, with the Creator inferring His intrinsic rights, amongst them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, how we understand, how we approach that Creator is properly left to the hearts and consciences of every citizen. For me, my wife and me, we're Catholic Christians. My parents, they're Hindus. I'm blessed to know Baptists, Jews, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, and so many more in the rich tapestry of American faiths. I also know men and women who acknowledge no denomination or creed, confess to uncertainty about the divine, yet who also look to the richness of nature and the majesty of this world and wonder, and seek inwardly the author of it all. These days, we think this diversity of belief is tolerated under our laws and our Constitution, but that's wrong. This diversity of belief is the foundation of our law and Constitution. America does not sustain and create faith. Faith created and sustains America. President John Adams in 1798 wrote to Massachusetts militiamen to instruct them this, to remind them this: our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. In 1798, this was simple common sense. In 2014, we are forced to confront a question that would have been unthinkable to President Adams and President Washington and President Reagan and every other American throughout history who believed in America's founding premise. That question is this: what happens when our government decides it no longer needs a moral and religious people? Today, the American people are, whether we know it or not, mired in a silent war. This war threatens the fabric of our communities, the health of our public square, and the endurance of our constitutional governance. It is a war against the propositions in the Declaration of Independence. It is a war against the spirit that motivated abolitionism. It is a war against the faith that motivated the civil rights struggle. It is a war against the soul of countless acts of charity. It is a war against the conscience that drives social change. It is a war against the heart that binds our neighborhoods together. It is a war against America's best self at America's best moments. It is a war. A silent war, but it is a war against religious liberty. This war is waged in our courts and in the halls of political power. It is pursued with grim and relentless determination by a group of like-minded elites, determined to transform the country from a land sustained by faith into a land where faith is silenced, privatized, and circumscribed. Their vision of America is not the vision of the founding. It's not even the vision of our nation 10 years ago. It is a vision in which an individual's devotion to Almighty God is accorded as much respect as a casual hobby and with about as many rights and protections. These elites have, to this point, faced little opposition. A not-for-profit here, a dedicated attorney there, a small business over there. A handful of principled organizations with the courage to stand up to the crushing weight of a liberal consensus unalterably opposed to their participation in the public square. They are the remnant who have the temerity to believe in America and its promises and to do something about it. After all, every person wants to live out his or her values. America's most fundamental promise is that we can. When we cannot, when we are told that our faiths and our consciences are inimical to good governance and the law, then we're not simply facing a threat to our faiths and consciences. We are facing a threat to the very idea of America, and it is by definition an existential threat. Margaret Thatcher famously said this: "Europe was created by history, America was created by philosophy." The secular elites understand this just as well as she did. They know to take over America, they must make war on this philosophy. This silent war is the real undercurrent driving politically fractious debates in a number of areas of policy. But why is this happening? What does it mean for the country and for people of faith? Why does it represent such a fundamental challenge to our American identity and the exceptional history that makes our nation great? I want to outline for you today the answers to these questions and then propose some key principles that ought to guide solutions to end this war peacefully and with respect for all. Consider just 3 storylines playing out in our states and our highest courts over the last several years in 3 different areas, yet all with overlapping effects. First, the freedom to exercise your religion in the way you run your business, large or small, is under assault. You've likely heard of the Obama administration's case against Hobby Lobby, a mega craft store and a family business whose battle against President Obama's contraception mandate will soon end up as a Supreme Court decision. The national chain filed suit after being told they'd be fined $1.3 million per day if they didn't pay for abortifacients through their insurance. Now look, America, Hobby Lobby is nothing less than an all-American success story. Just listen to their history. The family-owned company was launched in Oklahoma, and that's the only thing wrong. It's the only thing I don't like about this story. It should have been launched in Louisiana. But this great company was launched in Oklahoma in 1970 with nothing more than $600, a $600 loan, and a workshop in a garage. Today, from that garage, they've grown to 588 stores in 47 states. They've got more than 13,000 full-time employees. But that wasn't enough. They expanded, branching out to create a Christian supply shop to sell Bibles and craft supplies, opening another 35 stores in 7 states with another 400 employees. This is entrepreneurship at its best. A family-owned business that went from a $600 loan and a garage to 2 companies that employ almost 14,000 people full-time across this country. And through it all, Hobby Lobby has retained the guiding principle of their devout founders. Their statement of purpose begins with a Bible verse, and they are closed every Sunday, the Lord's Day. They've committed to honor their Lord by being generous employers. They pay well above minimum wage. They've increased salaries 4 years in a row despite this enduring national recession. The founding family has signed the giving pledge, committing to donate the majority of their vast wealth to philanthropy. This is the definition of what a faithful entrepreneur looks like. These should be American heroes celebrated. Yet none of this matters to the Obama administration. The argument they've advanced successfully thus far is that a faithful business owner cannot operate under the assumption that they can use their moral principles to guide the way their place of business spends money. According to the administration's legal arguments, the family that owns the Hobby Lobby is not protected by the First Amendment's free exercise of religion clause. Just as a reminder for the folks at home, that's the part of the First Amendment which states that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. The Obama administration and Attorney General Eric Holder argue that because Hobby Lobby is a for-profit secular company, and a secular entity by definition does not exercise religion. Federal judge actually agreed with them, saying since Hobby Lobby is, quote, a secular corporation, they have no right to be guided by the religious beliefs of their ownership. I want to remind you of something. The Green family, they weren't arguing that so-called morning after pills should be illegal, should be banned. They were doing nothing to prevent their employees from paying the small cost of such pills. They just had a serious moral problem with paying for something they viewed as inherently against their deeply held beliefs. The Obama administration's argument ignores these beliefs and treats them as little more than an inconvenience to its ever-expanding regulatory state. The administration's argument strikes at the core of our understanding of the free exercise of religion. Now, this case could have enormous ramifications for religious business owners across the country. Other court decisions along the way seem arbitrary and legalistic. A different judge recently found that longtime Bible publisher Tyndale House is not a secular company. So according to the courts, I guess being a Bible publisher means you can claim religious protection, but being a Bible seller doesn't. Perhaps we should all go in the business of printing Bibles so we too can claim protection. Under the Obama regime, the president and his allies are intentional in pursuing these conflicts from the perspective that you must sacrifice your most sacred beliefs to government the instant you start a business. See, you've got the protection of the First Amendment as an individual, but the instant you start a business, according to them, you lose your protections. That brings us to the second war in the second front in the silent war, the assault on our freedom of association as people of faith, to form organizations where we work alongside others who share our views. And that brings us to the Hosanna-Tabor case, which revolved around the ability of a Lutheran academy in Michigan to fire a teacher. Here, the Obama administration advanced another extreme argument, claiming that job regulations prevented the academy from being able to fire anyone over a difference in beliefs. The lawyers for the Obama administration went far beyond the specific issues of the case. They instead advanced the legally absurd proposition that there is no general ministerial exception, arguing that religious groups don't even have the constitutionally protected right to select their own ministers or rabbis. Now, thankfully here, the administration's extreme position was rebutted by the Supreme Court in a decisive fashion with a 9-0 decision opposing their perspective. Now, I'm no attorney, but you've got to take a pretty extreme position for Elena Kagan on one hand to join with Samuel Alito on the other hand to join on the same opinion. I knew the president didn't like the Second Amendment. I didn't realize he didn't like the First Amendment to the Constitution as well. For the time being, at least, the government doesn't get to decide who can preach the gospel. But the important thing to note is the government wanted to make that decision. They went into court making that argument. That is truly offensive and should be frightening to all of us, regardless of our faith. The administration advanced that extreme argument because it's consistent with the view of many on the left, particularly elite liberal legal scholars, that the God we must worship first is government, that our rights are doled up by Washington as they see fit. This same argument is even now being advanced against Catholic hospitals and adoption service providers and other organizations that have a deeply held worldview and simply want their members and their employees to share that worldview. The onslaught of lawsuits based on anti-discrimination law will inevitably lead to conflicts which damage our society. But these cases are only the beginning. This is only the tip of the iceberg. There is a much, much bigger threat, one that brings us to the third front in the silent war on religious liberty. The assault on your freedom of expression in all areas of life. Consider the many cases against bakers, photographers, caterers, and other wedding consultants who have religious beliefs which prevent them from taking part in a same-sex ceremony. Recently, the New Mexico Supreme Court ruled just in August that one small business, Lane Photography, had violated the state's Human Rights Act by declining to photograph a same-sex commitment ceremony. In his opinion, the judge informed the Christian photographers being fined that they were, quote, compelled by law to compromise the very religious beliefs that inspire their lives, because that was the price of citizenship. This assault is only going to spread in the immediate future. We're going to see continued pressure brought on anybody who refuses and refers. We're going to see more pressure that they be penalized for their views, denied membership in professional groups, even rejected from licenses. Many states have considered these issues in the light of the ongoing legal battle over marriage laws in our country. But that pressure is not going to stop with just photographers and bakers. This can be brought on churches, on mosques, and synagogues too. Consider the example of Illinois. They show us a preview of what this battle looks like. In legislation they proposed altering the definition of marriage, they would have required churches and other congregations to essentially close their doors to outsiders, to stop providing services to the community and close off their facilities to other not-for-profits or church groups in order to avoid being required to host same-sex ceremonies. The Illinois legislation would have required an unprecedented degree of government oversight, for example, such as sending government representatives to survey students at Catholic schools to see how many were actually Catholic. They wouldn't allow religious bodies to rent their facilities to non-members for use in weddings. They would drive churches to have to eliminate classes, day schools, counseling, fellowship hall meetings, soup kitchens, and much, much more. In other words, this law and others like it would require believers to essentially choose to break with their deeply held theological beliefs or to give up their daily activity of evangelism, to retreat from public life, and to sacrifice their property rights. Churches that do not host same-sex unions would essentially be barred from participating fully in civil society. This is the next stage of the assault, and it's only the beginning. You know, today an overwhelming majority of those who belong to a religious denomination in America, it's more than half of our country, are members of organizations that affirm the traditional definition of a marriage. All of these denominations will be targeted in large and small degrees in the coming years. Will churches in America even be able to remain part of the public square in a time when their views on sin are in direct conflict with the culture, and when expressing those views will be seen as hiding hateful speech behind religious protections? Consider what happens in Canada. Just as in Canada, where hate speech laws force courts to discern whether quoting Bible verses amount to violating human rights rules, giving up your rights of religious expression may, as the New Mexico judge put it, be, quote, just the price of citizenship. This war on religious liberty, on your freedom to exercise your religion, on your freedom to associate, on your freedom of expression, is only going to continue. It's going to continue because of an idea, a wrong-headed concept, which President Obama apparently believes, that religious freedom means you have the freedom to worship, and that's all. In this misbegotten, un-American conception of religious liberty, your rights begin and end in the pew. For those of us who believe in the Great Commission, we know how silly this view is. The President suggests the right to worship and the right to evangelize and freely practice our faiths are the same thing. They are not. They are not what the First Amendment clearly protects. The freedom to practice our faiths and protect our consciences, even if those activities don't happen to occur inside the four walls of a church building. We have the right to practice our faiths. We have the right to protect our consciences no matter where we happen to be. President Obama's limited view of religious freedom led to his administration arguing that people of faith can't even choose their ministers. It's what led the administration to force believers to stop running their businesses according to their beliefs. It's what led Illinois lawmakers to attempt to drive religious organizations out of the public square. And these are only the most public and recent examples. These battles over religious liberty will play out in the future from everything from public licensing to regulatory battles to divorce proceedings. So what can we do about this? What can be done about this? What course can we pursue to end this silent war on people of faith? How can we push back against challenges to our religious freedom which first brought the pilgrims to our shores in the first place? I believe, as in so many of the answers facing our nation, that the answer lies and begins with our states. Governors and state legislators across the country must now embark on a nationwide effort at the state level to protect the rights of believers of all faiths. Today, many states already have stronger protections for religious liberty than the federal Constitution provides. In the wake of the battle over the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a number of states have enacted religious liberty protections which adopt strict standards in their state constitutions, either by amendment or judicial decision. Just to give you two most recent examples, Kansas and Kentucky are the most recent states to pass bipartisan reforms. With the strong support of my friend Governor Sam Brownback in Kansas and overriding the veto of Governor Steve Beshear in Kentucky, they require proof of a compelling government interest before any state or local law can force citizens to act in opposition to their religious beliefs. These laws are a great start, but we need more of them. We must enshrine in our state laws strong legal protections for churches, religious organizations, and individual believers. No church or church-affiliated organization or individuals whose business is run in a manner consistent with their faith practices should be required by the state to take steps in conflict with their religion. Nor should they be legally punished for how they treat marital arrangements outside the teachings of their faith. A great example of how we accommodate this is the treatment of pharmacists. There's a broadly accepted accommodation which can be spread to other career tracks. Many religious believers who work as pharmacists feel uncomfortable filling prescriptions for birth control and abortifacients. Now, as a society, we've accepted that the pharmacist can pass off your account to another colleague so he isn't the one who has to fill the order. That's what a healthy society requires. That's what a healthy society does to protect. That's what a healthy society protects and tolerance requires. We must expand that protection to other areas of work and protect the rights of believers to practice their faith in all arenas of work. Now, but we also must keep some perspective on this silent war. It is certainly a challenging time to be a believer in America. But we must also consider the plight of believers around the world today. In nation after nation, Christians are being slaughtered by radical Islamists for their beliefs. It is a time of enormous upheaval in the Middle East where your beliefs can lead to your church being burned, your children being kidnapped, or can put you on the wrong side of a gun. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote that, and I quote, "The cross is laid on every Christian. It begins with the call to abandon the attachments of this world. When Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die." And today, around the world, many Christians are living out that calling. That's what really is a shooting war over a religion, not a silent one. So here in America, we need to be grateful that the laws and principles put in place by our founders, men like George Mason and James Madison and Patrick Henry, who understood the importance of religious liberty, have endured for so long. They are the reason America has come so far. It is those same principles that should guide us further still. Principles that understand that power is derived from the people, not from the government. Calvin Coolidge understood this in his own time. He said, and I quote, "We live in an age of science and of abounding accumulation of material things. These did not create our declaration created them. The things of the Spirit come first. Unless we cling to that, all of our material prosperity, overwhelming though it may appear, will turn into a barren scepter in our grasp." The things of the Spirit do come first. We must act and act now to protect them. The temptation in some corners is to ask for a truce in these fractious battles. But in practical terms, a truce would only amount to those who value religious liberty in laying down our arms. Our religious freedom was won over the course of centuries of persecution and blood, and we should not surrender them without a fight. Now, make no mistake. The war over religious liberty is the war over free speech. Without the first, there's no such thing as the second. If we allow our government to pick and choose what theology is acceptable and what is punishable by law, we have given government a larger scope over our lives and over the religious freedom of future generations than ever before. And we have fundamentally rejected the perspective of religion's special place in our society, which laid the seeds for the movements that ended slavery, that won civil rights, and led to the American Revolution. Now, this is not a battle any of us would have chosen. It is one we are called to join. We should do so gladly with our hearts and minds set on things above. As I come to my conclusion, a few final thoughts. First, let me be clear on something. You may or may not agree. You may agree or disagree with the Catholic Church on contraception. Most Americans disagree with the Church. You may consider yourself to be pro-life or pro-choice. Americans remain fairly divided on that issue. You may favor protecting traditional marriage between one man and one woman, or you may favor making gay marriage legal. Even amongst the folks in this room, if we did a poll, I bet you we would find a diversity and a wide array of views. None of that is relevant, however, to the points I've been making in this speech. Our religious liberty must in no way ever be linked to the ever-changing opinions of the public. To the contrary, we must understand that our freedom of conscience protects all Americans of every persuasion, however those persuasions may evolve. Second, it is unmistakable that most of the Obama administration's attacks on liberty are aimed at conservative Christians. But the fact is that our religious liberties are designed to protect people of all faiths. And I'll note, while I'm best described as an evangelical Catholic, my extended family is quite diverse when it comes to matters of faith. Our liberties in America demand equal protection for all. Third, for those of you who follow pop and popular culture, you may have taken note of the recent flap between the Robertson family of Duck Dynasty fame and the A&E network. I certainly couldn't come up here and talk about religious liberty without talking about the Duck Commander. You may have watched the fight between the Robertson family and A&E, the network that produces and broadcasts the Duck Dynasty show. You may have further observed that one of the loudest, most aggressive defenders of the family was the governor of Louisiana. Now, you may think I was simply defending the Robertsons because I'm the governor of their home state, the great state of Louisiana. Or you may think I was simply defending them because I've got two boys who watch every show and use their duck calls relentlessly through the house. But that's not right. I defended them because they've got every right to speak their minds, however indelicately they may choose to do so. Now, of course, A&E is a for-profit business. They can choose what they want to put on the air. There was something much, much larger at stake here. I want to point out something that happened during that debate. There was a time when liberals in this country believed in debate. Unfortunately, that is increasingly not the case for the modern left in America. The modern left in America has grown tired of debate. Their new strategy is simply to try to silence their critics. So these leftists immediately mobilized. They did all they could not to debate the issues, but rather to try to silence the Robertsons. You know, there was a time when the left preached tolerance in this country. The reality is they are indeed tolerant unless you happen to disagree with them. I want to paraphrase William F. Buckley. He said, "A liberal is somebody who welcomes dissent and then is astonished to find there is any." You know, the modern left in America is completely intolerant of the views of people of faith. They want a completely secular society where people of faith keep their views to themselves. Fourth, though this silent war on religious liberty may not seem as urgent as the fact that our national debt is over $17 trillion, it is actually a very pressing matter. Remember this quote from President Reagan: "Freedom is a fragile thing and is never more than one generation away from extinction. It's not ours by inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation." Finally, let me finish by mentioning an incredible irony. I've been working on this speech for a good while. I've been thinking about what I wanted to share with you tonight. Last Thursday, exactly a week ago, something truly bizarre occurred. The person who was at the tip of the spear prosecuting this quiet war on religious liberty spoke at the annual National Prayer Breakfast in Washington. The topic he chose to speak about was defending religious liberty. I was stunned. I bet you the president of Hobby Lobby, who happened to be in the audience, I bet you he was stunned as well. Look, the president waxed eloquent. He's a great speaker. He always speaks well about the horrors of religious persecution that are occurring beyond our borders. Good for him. And I want to be clear about this. I said this before. To be clear, churches in America are not being burned to the ground. Christians are not being slaughtered for their faith. There's no comparing the persecution of people of faith outside our borders to those inside our borders. Yet it's stunning to hear the president talk of protecting religious liberty outside the United States, while at the same time his administration challenges and chips away at our religious liberty right here at home. Once again, there's a Grand Canyon-sized difference between what this president says and what he does. Here's what the president said a week ago at the prayer breakfast that morning, no doubt playing to his audience, and I quote, "History shows that nations that uphold the rights of their people, including the freedom of religion, are ultimately more just and more peaceful and more successful." Well said, Mr. President. I couldn't agree more. So I'll leave you with this. The president is very concerned about religious liberty. And also, if you like your religion, you can keep your religion. Thank you. May God bless you. May God bless these United States of America. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much.
That was brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have indicated approval, and I think that you understand now why I waxed not lyrical, but we think a great deal of this young governor of Louisiana, and now you understand why. Now you get, yes, go ahead. Anytime you have that impulse, let it out.
Thank you.
You never want to stifle that impulse. It's not healthy. If you don't need to do it, we need to hear it. Now we are going to give you an opportunity to pursue the questions that you have. And again, I ask that anyone who wishes to ask a question do what this young lady is doing right here. Oh, I thought that was a microphone. Oh, it is. Okay. All right. In fact, all right, ladies, hold up your hands, those that have the mics. Okay, 1, 2, 3. They will come to you if you hold up your hand. And when they do, and I recognized you, would you please be kind enough to identify yourself? We're all friends. It's nice to know who you are, and it's a courtesy to the speaker. So, let's see the hands of those who'd like to be heard asking a question. We'll start over here.
Governor, we've had a huge problem in our schools and our civic buildings because there seems to be no more 10 Commandments. What do you suggest we could do to bring the 10 Commandments back into public life?
You know, that's a great question. Two things. First, about schools, and then the public square more generally. In schools, I'm a big believer that parents are the first and best educators. And what I mean by that is in Louisiana, we trust parents to make decisions about how their children should be educated. And so we've done that in 3 ways. And what I mean by that is I believe the dollars should follow the child instead of making the child follow the dollars. So one of the things we've done is we started a scholarship program in New Orleans. Now it operates statewide, where parents can decide if they want their kids to go to public schools, parochial schools, Christian schools, private schools, independent schools, whatever school makes the best sense for their children. Many parents have said, I want my child to be educated in a classroom where they can teach the 10 Commandments, or they can teach the values that are important to us here at home. And so now they're having that choice in an unprecedented way. We've done a scholarship program. It's grown by double digits every year. We've also done a tax credit and a tax rebate program to also encourage that kind of choice. The second thing we have done, in addition to the scholarship program, we've dramatically expanded the number of charter schools, as you heard in the city of New Orleans, but now statewide. But third, we've also offered something called course choice. So a student can start their day in a public school and then take courses throughout the day offered by a variety of providers, online providers, dual enrollment, or other providers. Maybe they'll get training for a job, or maybe they'll get advanced foreign language skills or things that couldn't be otherwise taught in their classroom. The reason I say all that is that by empowering parents to make that choice, I believe parents can then choose if they want to send their kids to a school that includes values-based learning and education and religious-based instruction, or they could choose to send their kids to another form of instruction. Here is our reward for doing that. I'll share with you 2 of the struggles we have faced. We had a union official in the state, in my state, say that parents don't have a clue when it comes to making choices for their children, when it comes to making educational choices for their children. I can't think of a better summary of the difference between how we view the world and how they view the world. I met with a group of moms the next day, and they said, we make decisions for our kids every day. We know the needs of our kids better than the bureaucrats in Baton Rouge and Washington, D.C. So the first thing I think we need to do is get away from this one-size-fits-all approach to education and say, let's empower and trust parents. The second thing we have faced, the Obama administration, Department of Justice, Eric Holder, has actually taken us to federal court. They wanted to stop that scholarship program in its tracks. They wanted to put a lot of burdens on it. First, they wanted an injunction, then they withdrew that, then they came back, and here's the ironic thing. They're using the very laws designed to protect disadvantaged children, to stop these children from getting a great education. Over 90% of the parents, 90% of the kids, over 90% are minority. 93% of the parents are happy with the education their kids are getting. You're saving the taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. It costs us on average about 60% of what we would otherwise spend by allowing these kids to go to the school of their parents' choice. So, and their academic performance has improved over time. So you've got a situation where taxpayers are saving money, the parents are happy, majority of these are minority kids, and you've got the Department of Justice, our thanks for all this is they're taking us to federal court. Now, they backed off a little bit, but they're still in federal court. Their latest Their latest request was that after we give a scholarship to a child, we can't tell that child for 45 days so they can go examine the race of the child. As if that should be relevant. To me, every child, regardless of race, deserves to get a great education. The most important answer to your question, though, on education, let's empower parents. Let's trust parents to make those decisions for their children. In terms of getting it back in the public square, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the left has this idea of a naked public square where we don't talk about our faith, we don't talk about our values. You only talk about it in church or on Sundays. You only talk about it maybe Wednesday nights, but you don't talk about it the rest of the week. And that's a mistake. I think that's what this whole fight has to be about. We've got to reclaim the public square, but not just in education, not just in schools. I think when it comes to our popular culture, I think when it comes to our media, when was the last time, and I say this seriously, when was the last time you felt comfortable watching the so-called family hour on TV with young children or grandchildren? Now, I'm not suggesting that you have laws telling the networks what to put on the air, but we need to go out and fight and transform our culture so we are comfortable having our values in the public square. I think it's wrong to believe we have a so-called naked public square devoid of those values that just a generation ago were pretty common in our popular culture and in our public square. So I think there's a bigger fight, not just in our schools. Certainly it's important in education, but I think there's a bigger fight across our entire culture.
Yes, sir. Would you state your name?
Yes, I am Patrick James, Dean's Professor of International Relations at USC. Great honor to be here and have a chance to ask a question. One of the things we see in the polling, Governor Jindal, across the board is dissatisfaction and frustration with Washington gridlock. If we got in a time machine for 2016, what advice, hypothetically, would we give a new occupant of the White House to try to overcome that and build cooperation?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for coming. Two things, and it is true. If you talk to anybody who served any time in D.C., I was in Congress for 3 years, they'll tell you it is bad when we were there and it's gotten worse. Since we've left, it's gotten worse progressively. I'd say two things. One, I don't think you fix Congress simply by sending a group of different people over there. There's this mistaken idea that both sides think this. If we just had more of our guys there, things would be working better. It's not a failure of personalities. It's not a failure of individuals. The reality was, I was there when the Republicans were in the majority, and I was there when the Democrats were in the majority. My first term, we were in the majority. My second term, we were in the minority, and it was bad both times. It wasn't like it went from being great to awful just because, and I liked it better when Nancy Pelosi wasn't Speaker, but it's not like Congress was, it wasn't like Congress was working beautifully before she got there. I believe you need structural reforms. And let me share with you some of the things we've done in Baton Rouge at the state level, and this is common for a lot of states. When you look at what we do in Louisiana, for example, it takes a 2/3 majority before you can raise taxes. It's in our Constitution that we have to balance our budget. We've got, in our Constitution, we can't grow our spending faster than the economy without a 2/3 vote. We've got part-time legislators who have term limits. And this is and we also have the line item veto and other things, and people will tell you we'll never do that in Washington. We were one vote in the Senate back in the 90s from getting the balanced budget amendment, at least through that part of the process. But let me say this, one of the biggest things that I think is different and broken and changed in Washington, D.C. is we have got a permanent governing class that the Founding Fathers never intended, never envisioned. And there are two practical things we could do to change that. It wasn't that long ago. It seems like this is ridiculous fiction, but it was only a few decades ago we had a part-time Congress. Now, I did work in the private sector for a while, and as a consultant, there was an old joke that if you're a company, if you're a business executive, if you buy an $800 hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. And the point of that is if so many companies invest in expensive technologies, or they just seem determined to use it, if you have a full-time Congress, they're going to look for things to do. Government's going to grow. And now, I would say, having said that, I do think Congress is abdicating control currently in watching over the executive branch. I'm not just suggesting, I think we need more oversight, not less oversight, and I think this president ignores the legislative branch. But here's the real change. If we had elected leaders the way the Founding Fathers intended, who viewed serving in the legislative branch, who viewed serving in government as a temporary sacrifice they made for their country, they went and did that and then went and lived under the same rules they passed for the rest of us. Think how much better we would be. Two things I think you need to do to stop that. One, you've got to stop the revolving door where they go from being congressmen to lobbyists. They don't even go back home to their home states or run companies or run businesses anymore or go back and be farmers in the old days or whatever it is that they were supposed to do ahead of time. But here's the other thing, and I say this half seriously. You know, we pay our congressmen a full-time salary. In Baton Rouge, we pay our legislators a per diem, for every day they're there. I've written this out, nobody's taking me seriously on it. I think we should pay our congressmen a per diem for every day they stay outside of Washington, not for every day they go to Washington. And I think we'd be better off. But the final point I'd make to you is that I think the reason you hear every governor, Democrat or Republican, say that it was easier working with their legislators. My first term, we had a Democratic majority. My second term, we've got a Republican majority. You'll find governors, Democrats and Republicans, I bet you if you ask them, tell you it's easier to work at the local level. And the most frustrated people you ever meet, I meet in politics, are former governors who go on to become U.S. senators. They hate the process and the system after having worked at the state level. One of the differences is I think that at the local level, you're forced to get things done. And I think the only way you change D.C. is you make those structural changes so they can't just keep printing money and avoiding the tough decisions. If you don't do that, yeah, look, I'm rooting for my side, the Republicans, to take the Senate, and I'm rooting for my side to keep the House. But I don't think you're going to see wholesale changes until you make structural changes. I wish I could tell you, you just vote for the right person and everything changes. I don't think that's true. I think it takes structural changes to fix Congress.
In the Senate.
First of all, thank you, Governor. My name is David Hernandez. I'm an American of Mexican descent. And, your talk tonight was so right on. 10 years ago, the ACLU threatened to sue the County of Los Angeles unless they removed the cross from the county seal. That issue went national and was reviewed on the House of Representatives. Last month, the Board of Supervisors voted to return a cross to the Los Angeles County seal. And in line with what the reaction to Duck Dynasty, the legal persecution of bakers and florists and photographers, do you see that the pendulum is beginning to swing the other way, where Christians are beginning to say enough, and that politicians are listening to us so that they will step forward and defend our religious freedom?
Well, first of all, thank you for those kind comments. I have to tell you, I don't think we know the answer to that yet. I think there are a lot of folks, whether they agree with my views or not on a number of the issues that I raised tonight, my hope is this. Because I'm an optimist by nature, and I believe in the best of the American people. I think the brilliance of the founders was trusting the American people, not the government. And I think the president's quote was so right, that every generation has to decide to renew for itself that greatness, those principles of freedom. It's not inevitable, and we don't get that as an inheritance. We have to renew it. So yes, I'm optimistic and I'm confident that the American people, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of their denomination or creed or their particular views on particular social issues, do understand that religious liberty is worth standing up for. Do understand it's worth standing up and saying, I'm going to fight for my neighbor's right to have their views, whether I agree with them or not. I think that a majority will fight for that, will stand up for that, but I also believe that we're seeing an unprecedented attack on religious liberty, the likes of which we've not seen before. We've seen minor skirmishes before. We've seen the taking down of symbols of faith in public arenas. We've seen discussions of voluntary prayer. We've seen some of these debates before. What I don't think we've seen is this kind of systematic attack from our government. I think the Supreme Court case is going to be telling. What are they going to say to the Green family? What are they going to say to the Hobby Lobbies of the country? I think it's telling that at least what's encouraging to me is when the administration tried to go away and take away the ministerial exception, it was a 9-0 ruling, even from very liberal justices. But what's amazing to me is that they would even try in the first place. I think there are elites in this country that are determined to press this cause. So I don't think it's going away. I don't think the fight's going away, but I am optimistic that a majority of the American people still understand the founding, what was so critical to our country. But I think this is the pressing issue. When it comes to all these skirmishes, I think it really is about religious liberty. I think we need to understand what's at stake. We need to raise our voices. We need to get involved. I think if we do that, we can certainly win, but I don't think it's inevitable that we win. I don't think we can sit at home and just assume they're going to do the right thing, or we can assume the courts will rule the right way. I think you're going to see more and more and more challenges. That's why I think it's really critical. Every state out there that hadn't done it yet, pass your own version of this Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So when you think about it, two tenets there. One, that there should be a compelling state interest, and it should be done in the least intrusive way possible before you think of violating somebody's religious beliefs. To me, that should be broadly accepted and popular. It should be hard to reject that, but I guarantee you that's going to be a fierce debate. So I think that there are specific things we can do. The most important thing, we can't influence what the Supreme Court's going to do in the Hobby Lobby case. We can get those laws passed and put in the constitutions or in our statutes across every state in this country, and that'd be a great first step, I think, to turning the tide on this battle.
This gentleman right here in the center aisle.
Hi, Governor. My name is Thomas Logue. As a retired law enforcement officer and Marine, one of the biggest things that I learned was integrity. And, I'm glad that you're here tonight, and I think the integrity that you have can take us forward and take our nation forward, and I hope you do.
Thank you.
With that, I'm very concerned about seeing every president utilizes executive orders. And I'm very concerned to see that this president appears to be using them to circumvent the Congress and the law of the land and just basically do what he wants to do. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, well, first of all, thank you for your service in the military and law enforcement. Let's give them a round of applause for your service. My wife and I are blessed to have 3 young children. We teach them that those that service in uniform as first responders in the military who run towards danger, not away from it, those are our real heroes. So thank you for what you've done to serve our country and our people. I couldn't agree with you more. I've joked, I'm no constitutional scholar, but I think this, and I don't like lawsuits, but I think this president should sue Harvard Law School to get his money back, because I don't know what he learned about the Constitution. It's amazing to me. Look, I don't agree with Obamacare. I think it was predictable that it was going to have these awful unintended consequences. I think part of them were intended. I don't think all of it was unintended. I think it was not just a poorly executed law, it was a poorly designed law. Regardless of what you think about the law, though, it is amazing to me. Just this last week, the president yet again delays the mandate for medium-sized, smaller employers, though not for individuals, mind you. For yet another, you're conveniently putting it off till after the next election cycle for his party. It's amazing to me, whether you like or support or disagree with the law, and I disagree with it, that the president feels like he's got the authority to pick and choose time and time and time again which parts of the law he's going to enforce, when he's going to enforce them. To me, it's increasingly arbitrary, and it is, you're exactly right. I don't think it's constitutional. I think it's a violation of the separation of powers. I guarantee you, many of the folks that are silent today in the editorial pages in the academic world, if President Reagan, President Bush, or a Republican president had decided to do this, would be roundly criticized as overreaching and expanding the powers of the executive branch. And as governor, look, there are laws I may not like that my legislature passes or have been passed in previous years. It's not my prerogative to simply ignore them. You take an oath to uphold the laws of the Constitution. And so I agree with you. I think it is amazing. This isn't the first time. I mean, you have to remember, this is an administration that, at one hand, and I'll get in trouble if I start giving a bunch of examples, but this is an administration that thought, that they're trying to go after the gun rights of law-abiding citizens. They're providing guns to Mexican drug cartels in Fast and Furious. This is an administration that's going after school choice in Louisiana. This is an administration that time and time again seems to redefine what they think is the law and how they can enforce the law, even those that are on the other side, that are supporters of the ACA, that are supporters of this president, I would hope would have the integrity to stand up and say, we don't think this is right. One of the things I always remember, when people come to me and say, wouldn't it be great, look, you're a governor, wouldn't it be great if you had this power or that power? Wouldn't it be great if you had this authority? I said, you should always imagine that the person you disagree with the most politically has the office that you're talking about, whether it's president or governor or legislator. Now think about that for a minute. Whoever that person is, would you want them to have the same powers that you're thinking about taking for yourself? I think we should give the federal government, I think we should give the government the least amount of power we possibly can. I think that's been a great tradition in America. So to our friends on the left that want to defend this president, no matter what he does, I would say 2 things. One, be careful. Once you set this precedent, would you really want, for them, would they really want the next conservative president to have these powers? And then secondly, I also think, the Wall Street Journal think I did a great job on his most recent flip-flop on enforcing the mandate. On one hand, they say it's not a job killer. On the other hand, they're saying they're delaying the mandate because they don't want to hurt the economy. You can't have it both ways. You either defend the law you passed, or you say, yeah, no, it's really going to have bad consequences, so we're not going to enforce it. You can't have it both ways. But I think, to my friends on the left, I would warn them, your silence today is going to speak volumes the next time there's a president you disagree with. How in the world are they going to stand up with any kind of credibility and complain when another president of another party tries to do the same things using this president's actions as precedent? So I agree. I think anybody that's interested in the balance of power, the constitutional limits on the executive branch, should be very worried about his unilateral power grab. And I think it's very, very bad for our country.
In the back.
Hi, Governor. Can I ask, my name's Terry.
Hi.
And I just want to know when you're going to make the decision to run for president and when you're going to win.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I'll tell you, look, the honest answer is I don't know what I'm going to do after I'm done being governor. I'd say two things about 2016 and the presidential election. Because there are a lot of folks speculating about who's it going to be and who's going to run on our side and who's going to run on their side. The first thing I'd say is the way you win elections is you win elections. Let's go win 2014 first. We got 36 governor's races, the United States Senate, and the Congress at play. I'm still involved in the RJ. We got some very important governor's races. The football analogy is this. I'm an LSU Tiger fan. We're SEC fans. Every LSU fan wants every year. We just got through National Signing Day. Everybody's asking, we're going to win the national championship next year. I mean, the toughest job in Louisiana is not being governor, it's being the football coach. I'll promise you, because everybody wants, are we going to win the national football championship? And if you're Sean Payton for the Saints, are you going to win the Super Bowl? They haven't even gotten to the draft. Are you going to win the Super Bowl? And I guarantee you, those coaches are telling their players, first we're going to go train, then we're going to focus on the preseason, then we're going to win the first game, then we'll get to the championship when we get there. Let's go win 14 first. But secondly, as for me in 16, I think this next election has got to be a debate of ideas, not personalities. This last time, I think this president didn't want to talk about the issues. He wanted to talk everything about the issues. He characterized Governor Romney, who's a decent person and a fine person. I think for too many election cycles, we've done a good job saying, while the other side shouldn't be there, and this is not just a criticism of 2012, but I think for too many cycles, we've not done a good enough job saying what we would do if we were there differently. I started an organization called America Next, devoted not to elections, but to policy. Writing out detailed policies on health care. How do you replace Obamacare? How do you help people with pre-existing conditions without creating a massive government entitlement program? On energy, why is domestic energy important for a manufacturing base in this country? On education, how does school choice and tenure reform help all of our students learn and improve our economy and our quality of life? So for the next year at least, I'm going to be focused not only on RGA, helping our governors win and our candidates win, and we've got some great ones, but also making sure that we are, as conservatives, as pro-growth conservatives, we win the debate of ideas. And I remind you of this. Remember the last two times you really had just a great outpouring of conservative ideas. Maybe the most exciting, you remember the 1970s between the time that President Reagan was governor and president of the United States? He went out and built the case for conservative governance. Now, in retrospect, it's amazing. There's a lot of revisionist history going on. People looking back and saying, oh, this was self-evident. People claiming Reagan is, and I'm glad they're claiming Reagan is theirs, because that shows you how proud they are and how successful his legacy is. But if you go back in time in the 1970s and you made the case that we're going to stop the evil empire, not détente, not contain them, not neutralize, the smart intellectuals were saying, don't you dare take on the Soviet Union. Why are you talking like this? This is the talk, this is mad. They're going to crush us you're going to get us into a hot war instead of a cold war. If you were talking about breaking the back of inflation, if you were talking about the whole idea of cutting taxes and growing the private sector economy, people thought that was foolish. That was no way to get the private sector up on its feet again. If you were back then talking about America is the greatest country in the world and our future, our best days are ahead of us, you remember the days of stagflation and long lines at the gas station and people in the malaise and everything that was happening? And what was interesting was Governor Reagan didn't just make the election about, look at all the bad things President Carter's doing. He presented detailed, conservative, thoughtful solutions. One of the things I loved in his first inaugural speech, and I'll paraphrase, he said, look, the federal government didn't create the states created the federal government. He had a view of federalism even before that was being debated in the nation's capital. So that was one period. Another period, in the 90s, you had Republican governors leading the way with welfare reform, like Engler and Leavitt and Tommy Thompson and others, showing at the state level that conservative ideas could work. So I think that's what we need to do. Let's go show people we do have conservative ideas. If the president wants to divide us by class, by gender, by race, if he wants to call names, if he wants to just sit there and double down on the failed policies of spending more, borrowing more, taxing more, let him do that. Let's show them we've got real ideas that work. That's how we earn our way back into the majority. Not just by calling names like the other side, but by showing them we have ideas that work. Let's have the confidence of our convictions. I'm a conservative because I think it works. I think it improves the quality of life for every American, for 100% of America. And let's go fight and show people that we actually have the courage of our conviction. So let's go focus on winning in 14. Let's go win the battle of ideas. And sometime after the 14 election, then we can have folks, including me, think and decide what they want to do in 16. But we've got some other work in front of us first.
Clearly, the governor is not tired. But because you have been such an attentive audience and so eager to ask questions, it's my painful duty to tell you that we are 17 minutes over. So we thank you for being the kind of audience of which I am always so proud. And we thank Governor Jindal and his lovely wife, their staff, for coming and visiting the library.
Thank you again.
And knowing this to be a courteous audience, I will thank them in advance when I make the request, as I do now, to allow the governor and his party to leave us with good wishes, and I think you've already manifested beyond doubt your good wishes to them. Thank you.